it will be put online so that also people who couldn't make it are able to see what we did and benefit from that. If you would be uncomfortable with that also after this session, then please feel free to reach out soon after the session to ENA to let them know. Should you during the meeting become unable to play the audio through your device, you can dial in using the phone number that you see and that Katie sent around in the meeting. And I think we all know this after more than a year of mainly online meetings. You can ask questions or make comments, raise your hand virtually or real life, or use the chat function throughout the meeting. So whatever you prefer at any moment, feel free to ask questions. And if at some point it becomes necessary to structure it a little bit more, I will do so. Should you be unable to use the chat functionality, try using the Teams meeting, joining the Teams meeting through the app using incognito private browsing, using Chrome or Edge if you can. Important today is we will be doing a lot of polling with poll everywhere. So for that, the website, and we will see that in the questions too, the website to go to is pollev.com/GTGAG, Gas Goes Green Advisory Group. And if you have any questions or suggestions after this meeting, feel free to reach out to the program team directly at the email address listed. Maybe more importantly, what are we going to do today? A brief welcome from Tom. I'm talking you through the practicalities of this meeting, but then more importantly, Tom is going to give you an update of what happened since the last meeting. And I think that's something you have asked for in previous meetings, an overview of opportunities to get involved and to provide input next to this meeting, of course. And then you'll see that we'll mainly be focusing on two work streams. Work stream 2.1, the blending delivery timeline, on which we have a lot of questions to be discussed with you to make sure that the team that is working on it gets most out of this meeting in terms of your input. Followed by workstream 6.1, which is about green gas and power generation data to be transparent about the role the gas networks are playing and the progress they are making towards the transition. And then at the end, Tom will wrap it up by 12 o'clock. Are there any questions on the agenda? I see that there's a chat, but I can't see the chat yet.
There was only a comment if we were able to share the Poll EV link in the chat, which has been done.
Good. Then let's continue. And maybe, Tom, you can briefly talk about what this advisory group is about, just as a reminder.
Yeah, overall, we're just very keen to get stakeholders' views on the work we're doing, whether there's questions that we need to be answering and evidence we need to be building to support the continuing role of green gas and a growing role of green gas in delivering net zero. So very keen to have your input on any of the specific deliverables, but also more widely to sort of help shape the direction that we go. So as Mikhail said, an opportunity today to feed into two of the deliverables that we have underway. But as I'll update, there's other work and other opportunities coming up where it'd be great to get your views. The terms of reference, the full terms of reference are available on the website. And if anyone has got any questions on those, do drop us a note.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Then let's see what happens since the last meeting and talk about the opportunities to get involved. And for that, in the last meeting, we already started using this structure, and we intend to do so throughout the year so that you can gradually see how the intentions that existed at the start of the year, how we delivered on these during the year. Tom, can you briefly talk through this slide and about the progress that has been made on the various work streams?
Sure, Mikhail. So I'll be as brief as I can. There's a lot of work underway and a lot to cover, which is good. And thanks to those who have been in touch to share views as things have got underway this year. So all of the dozen or so deliverables that we have for 2021 are now underway. On 1.1 that you can see there on the top left on the net zero strategy, we've had several conversations with electricity network colleagues and with other members of the whole energy systems work group that ENA runs. And that's a group that reports to Gasco's Green Steering Group and the Open Network Steering Groups. And we put together a paper for their views, and that sort of outlines what a potential project in this space could look like if we are to develop a shared network pathway of how we get to 2050. When we launched the program earlier this year, and in our previous advisory group, I think I mentioned we see this as really important. This is a cross-network piece of work, and it really links in some of the work that the electricity networks are doing with the work that the gas networks are doing, and in doing so provides something that's helpful for local authorities and regional bodies that are looking to put in place local area energy plans to make their steps in meeting net zero. So as I say, work underway on that. The zero carbon commitment is a sort of network-led piece of work on the projects that will take place over the next 5 years and indeed beyond. And we're putting the finishing touches to this, drawing largely from the network's business plans. That should be published within the next month, and so we'll share a link with that once that's up and running. I mentioned sort of regional engagement, and for the 1.3 deliverable here, really I wanted to say that networks are continuing to develop these national and regional planning and pathway studies. A project that we've mentioned previously that SGN and National Grid are doing with Scottish Government to develop a Scottish decarbonisation pathway. That's complete, and we'll be able to send around details of when that's being published, but expected in the next few weeks. Wales and West Utilities have just started a regional decarbonisation pathways project as well. So a lot more work in this space coming to really add some more detail to the decarbonisation plans that the networks have. I won't say too much on the blending deliverable we have under Gasco's Green Deliverable number 2.1, as you'll hear from Bill Good on this shortly. I will say that, though, that a lot of thinking has been done in relation to this, and really happy to be sharing some of this thinking with you all today, getting your input on that. And we've been engaging with the BEIS-led gas blending group to collect input via a number of different channels and different stakeholders through that.
Tom, these circles, these Harvey balls, what do they indicate?
They are a sort of a general statement as to our progress on these deliverables. So you can see that the blending timeline is coming to a close. And we should have something to share on that in July. And as Bill will set out, there might be more questions raised from that work, which we can take into other pieces of work. So on 3.1, on the costs and benefits of hydrogen to the consumer, work's well underway here to see what assumptions can be updated. So we are currently updating the cost of conversion figures that were last collected for government in 2017, 2018. And as most of you will be aware, the networks have been doing considerable testing of assets and evidence gathering. So there's a real opportunity to update some of those core assumptions and see what that means for an overall cost of conversion figure, price figure. To follow on from that, we are looking into developing a model to understand other costs and benefits of hydrogen, what other assumptions there might be, and how we could update those and ensure that we're using the most accurate and appropriate figures. It's probably worth mentioning here that over the last couple of months, we've actually set up an academic challenge forum with a dozen or so academics representing green gas interests or with green gas research interests across the spectrum. We set that up and ran a first meeting a month ago or so, And really, we created that following some specific feedback through this advisory group last year. Some of the academics supporting Gas Goes Green via the advisory group wanted an opportunity to get closer to some of the work and be able to input and challenge particularly some of the data with fellow academics. So wanted to set that up for that reason. Mikhail?
Tom, a question from Zoe. Will those updated figures be published on the consumer costs? And if so, what's the anticipated timeline?
So I can't say too much about the timeline. Certainly it's our intention to publish those figures once we've got them. And I think we'd be keen to work with the advisory group and stakeholders to actually see of the range of assumptions that would be relevant, what might have the biggest variance, where's our efforts best placed if we're going to spend some time researching and delving into the details of these. So it'd be good to get your thoughts on that once we've got a further sense as to what this project could look like and when it could run.
Okay, and there's a couple of more questions. So when you say hydrogen cost to consumer, are you talking end consumer or industry consumers, with the assumption from Victoria that it's end consumer? Is that correct?
That's correct. Thinking we've approached that in relation to consumer bills. There might be a sort of subset of that data that would be relevant to industry in terms of costs. That's maybe something that we can take away and think about.
And what range of consumers are included in this? Julie's question.
Similar to that point, I suppose. At the moment, we're focusing on consumer bills, but an opportunity probably to do a bit more thinking about other consumers and other costs.
And Zoe is happy with your answer and would like to be involved and feel more data is needed. Then going to Liam's question. Could you ask that question yourself, Liam, please?
I can. Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Thomas. You mentioned the development of a model for understanding those costs. Will there be a review of existing modeling capability that's available that might be used already rather than building something new?
Yeah, that's sort of the stage we're at currently, Liam. So if there's available tools that are appropriate, certainly we'll make use of those. And one of the initial tools we're considering is a model that was developed through the Whole Energy Systems work group last year, gas and electricity networks inputting on a CBA. And that's a CBA that Ofgem have recognised as being appropriate for networks to use.
And then quoting Julie, literally, so to be clear, the scope is domestic?
Currently, Julie, but I think we can consider whether that's appropriate as we scope the project.
And then Chiara says that the Academic Challenge Forum is a good initiative. Does it include all green gases or is it mostly focused on hydrogen, Tom?
All green gases.
And John, community housing, Simru, are also very interested in the end cost to the consumer going forward and how it compares to the current regime.
Thanks, John. I think that's good to have in mind, and I think again, it's once we've got a sort of sense as to what this project will look like, it would be good to get further views on when we're thinking about costs and benefits. Clearly, the ENA and the gas networks might have one set of data in mind. It would be good to test that with people and see if other people have other assumptions and other data sets.
I think it's fair to say that this discussion can also be summarized that there's a lot of traction on workstream 3.1. But having said that, Tom, let's continue.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone for the input. So on 3.2, so on the work we have looking at industrial clusters and the license and code regime, we've several workshops have taken place between BEIS, Ofgem, the networks, and other subject matter experts. Those are sort of looking into the regulatory framework that may be required to manage the funding, the construction, the commissioning, the initial operation of emerging hydrogen clusters. And through those workshops, we are sort of looking to understand if there is, what the requirements in the future might be, and how to manage that change. The options that result from those are probably expected to go into a consultation. I think that's a question largely dependent on the next steps that the BEIS and Ofgem in particular have for that. But I think there's a need to get other views on those options. On 3.3, so work's just commenced on this really, and over the next couple of months we'll be developing community engagement plans for off-grid communities. Don't have too much more to say on that currently. The 3.4 deliverables, work on this is also underway, primarily at this stage with networks gathering the cost data that would inform this analysis. On 4.1, the support for green gas producers. So we continue to support producers via the Entry Customer Forum principally, and through this forum, the networks are working with producers, with suppliers, with grid entry unit equipment manufacturers, and have agreed a number of have resolved a number of issues that have been raised. There's an agreed position on support for in-grid compression that's been developed over the last few months. They're working on common approaches for how to manage short durations of gas being injected into the network which don't meet the necessary specification, but as I say, are for short durations and meet the overall day requirements. And we've been working to ensure that Ofgem are happy with this from a consumer perspective. And Entry Customer Forum members have also been working together to get to consistent positions on some gas analyzers that are used. A number of other areas that are finishing and drawing to a close, and I think it's really a good example of how networks working right across industry and those involved in green gas production have been working together to resolve some of these issues and make some progress. So very happy with how things are going there. And thanks to everyone. I know many of you involved are joining the call today. On 4.2, so work's really just commenced on this project, but this is something where we'd be looking for input from across industry. So do keep an eye out for invites over the summer to join workshops on CHP conversion. I think there's a lot of different perspectives and views that could be taken on this, so we want to make sure the work's reflective of those. On fugitive emissions, networks have just concluded a gap analysis of the network work that's been underway in recent years and are evaluating whether there's benefit in further work. Again, that's something that once there's a network view there, we're happy to share that. On 5.1, so certainly much work underway to deliver the BEIS and industry activity in relation to hydrogen. In addition to the blending work I mentioned, the networks are working across industry with industrial clusters on the development of those, with BEIS and through the Hydrogen Advisory Council, and on the joint BEIS and industry hydrogen programme, not least to develop plans for neighbourhood and village trials in response to the Prime Minister's 10-point plan. 5.2, we actually put this work on hold so it could follow the blending timeline work that I mentioned, and sort of respond to that. But we do now think it's a good time to be progressing that, and think about how with hydrogen connection agreements, how we could learn lessons, I suppose, from the biomethane experience. On 6.1 and data, Beth and Winter will be updating on this shortly, so I won't say more on that. And lastly here, in relation to 6.2, the deliverable we have on defining a smart gas network, this is close to completion. We should be able to share that summary report in a month or so, and look forward to views on that, and of course any of the other work underway.
And then in the previous advisory group calls, I think some of you asked to share an overview of opportunities to get involved and to provide input. Now the challenge is that ENA provided that overview, but it turned out to be a 3 slides overview. So Tom, please talk us through it in a concise way. Let's see how that works.
Yeah, I think this is hopefully a bit of a reiteration of what I was just saying, but with dates in terms of what's coming up and how we'd invite you to get involved over the coming months. As Mikhail said, this was called for, and rightly so, in our last meeting, and so hopefully this is a useful look ahead. And clearly there's more detail on what we have coming up in the short term. I think we've gone all the way out to the end of the year. And we'll update this in future meetings, so you have got that forward look. I suggest, Mikhail, that we sort of skip the specifics, as I think I did cover off most of these points.
Yeah, I think you did. But let's make sure that we share this soon after the session.
Thanks, Mikhail. Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing.
Question from Laura on 5.2. Who would recommend learning from the ENA G59? Generation connection on electricity. She suspects that the demand for hydrogen injection connections will be significantly higher than biogas connections. What do you think, Tom?
Can't speak to the G59 process, but I'm happy to take that to the networks. And thanks for that, Laura. I think really to meet anything like the amount of green gas that's required, we're going to need a lot more connections of both biogas and hydrogen than what we've seen currently. So changes to make the connections process easier is, I think, useful across the piece.
Okay.
Noted on that, Scott.
Okay. Then let's have a question to all of you rather than only to Tom. It's actually Tom's question, I think. So let's go to Paul EV. And the question that Gasco Screen would like to have your input on is they will be developing some educational materials, including in relation to the role networks can have in industrial decarbonization. What type of materials would you find most useful? So at the top of the screen, you can see, it's also in the chat already, but you can see that you can respond at paulev.com/GGGAG, Gasco Screen Advisory Group. And there, please answer A, B, C, D, E, or F. And I see 6 of you have already been doing that. So please go to paulev.com. And please let us know what you think would be most useful, where other, of course, is also an answer, and then we'll ask you to tell you what you are thinking of. So I see 11 votes, so I give it a little bit more time. Is the polling process clear for everybody, or no, I see. So the poll's name is at the top of the screen that I'm sharing, paulev.com/GGGAG. You can fill in your name, I think, but you can also not do that. Tom, what is the target audience for this activity?
I think it is an informed audience, but so I would say still energy industry, but we want to begin to do more to show how a lot of these sectors and siloed work is really part of an overall change that needs to take place. So I think it is still an informed audience, Chiara, but trying to sort of step out and do our bit to show how this links up.
Okay, thanks. I see we have 18 votes. We are going to do much more polling. It's approximately half of the participants. Okay, 21 now. Is it clear for everybody how the voting goes? Because we'll do much more voting, so it is worthwhile spending some time on it if people are still struggling. Okay, Fiona, you could also do this on a separate screen on your same computer, I think, if that helps. Anybody else who struggles with the Poll EV or who doesn't know how to operate a Poll EV? No, then I see we have 24 results. Let's show how you voted. Okay, that is pretty outspoken. So a significant preference for infographics and pamphlets rather than long reports or animations, I would say. The other, I guess that's one of you. If you are happy to, please, could you speak up and tell what you are thinking of? So one of you voted other. What were you thinking of? Could you say so? No, then also feel free to contact ENA directly on that. Meanwhile, I think it's a pretty outspoken result. Tom, is it a surprise? Is this in line with your thinking? What are you going to do with this result?
I was coming into this sort of open to advice, so really happy to have something quite clear. I think I'll speak to our comms colleagues about this. It's helpful and certainly for the immediate piece we have on industrial decarbonisation. I think this is really useful and something we can take stock of.
Okay, good. Then I think there are two more remarks you want to make in this introduction part about the hydrogen safety commitment, Tom.
Yeah, really the last update I wanted to give was just on the Hydrogen Safety Summit we held a couple of weeks ago, and the hydrogen safety commitment that was launched there. This was signed by the chief executives of all 5 gas networks, and this is really the commitment of the networks to ensuring that any hydrogen transition will make the gas grid, if not as safe, then safer than it is today. And we base these on the 4 core principles that you can see on the slide here. And these are also those that had underpinned our hydrogen network plan that we published at the start of the year. So we've set out that the networks would always maintain a safety first approach, adhering to the same standards of safety as today, that they would look into new opportunities to make the gas networks safer than they are today through innovation and new technology. They would act transparently by sharing outcomes of safety-related gas network innovation projects, and they would support consumer choice by testing the widest possible range of hydrogen-ready technologies. And on the next slide, really, I just wanted to flag that this work and the approach taken has been built on, in particular, the Leeds Beckett University social science research that was undertaken alongside or as part of NGN-led H21 work on safety. The use of hydrogen for heating, hot water, cooking was indicated in the research that Leeds Beckett undertook, was indicated as not really being a major concern for participants. They assume that if the supply of gas was converted to hydrogen, then it would be robustly tested and found to be safe. But clearly the networks wanted to reiterate the strong safety record and the approach to safety that we're taking going forward. So I just really wanted to flag that. Thanks to those who joined the session. I hope you found it as interesting as we did. And thanks to all those presenters who are involved in that as well.
Thank you, Tom. Any questions so far before we go into the details of blending? No, then let's continue. And thank you also from my side for the many questions and remarks that you have already made. That is the intention of this session. So I think in the first half hour we all did well. And thank you also for the enthusiastic voting. And let's keep on doing that. You will see that in the next session about blending. The presentation is regularly interrupted by asking questions in Poll EV, which we then follow up on with more of a discussion. So really, I hope that we can have this level, that we can continue this level of engagement, which will be kicked off by Bill Good, who is Senior Development Lead at National Grid Gas Transmission. I think what you will be talking about is about blending, the blending delivery timeline. So I'm curious to hear what you mean with that, what you have been thinking so far, and what you would like to get out of this advisory committee in terms of new insights. Bill, the floor is yours.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thanks, Mikael, and good morning, everyone. It's hopefully everyone can hear me, and it's really great to be here with you today at the advisory group to talk to you about the Gas Goes Green 2.1 deliverable, the blending timeline pathway. So before we go into the session, I just wanted to give you a little bit of clarity again on how we've structured today's agenda item. So I've got a number of slides which I'll talk you through, and these will include the objectives of the project, what we've done today, the project structure, and some initial thinking on the timeline. Then throughout the slides, as Mikael's mentioned, then we'll ask a number of related questions, which is hopefully where you'll come in, and we'll get to hear your views on the question and the wider project. And we as the project team really, realise that this is a fantastic opportunity for us to hear a wide variety of stakeholder views, and hopefully, you'll find it as a real positive opportunity for you to input and help shape the output of the project. So just before I move on to the slides, I just wanted to sort of introduce two other sort of team members who are also on the call. So it's Courtney West, a project officer at SGN, and Ed McDonald, a net zero analyst at National Grid. And you'll be hearing their voices throughout the agenda on today, and I know that I have questions for you, and I'm sure they'll help answer some of the questions that you have for me. Okay, so on to that first slide. So the first slide really is an overview of the objectives of the project. So the most important point to make here is that this is a markets-based project, and the project is looking at market framework change required to facilitate hydrogen blending and increased biomethane injection. So we've tried to take a very broad view of what is classified as market framework change to try and help deliver an output of maximum value. And that's why we've incorporated regulatory, legislative and safety change into the timeline, along with more traditional areas like code and license change. This is a short project, and it's our ambition to have sort of draft outputs available by the end of July. And for a project of this size, our overarching aim really is to sort of highlight gaps and create a pathway for future work, rather than sort of define sort of specific market solutions. And whilst the timeline will be the key output, we plan to deliver additional value through the research we're undertaking as part of the project, and we've got more examples of that later in the slide deck. So where does the project fit with the wider decarbonisation strategy? So we know through the government's 10-point plan, the innovation projects that are in flight, there's a huge amount of focus on hydrogen blending at the moment. And from a markets perspective, we have to ensure that the market frameworks, in the broadest sense of the word, are not a blocker to the energy transition, and they're not a blocker to change. So this timeline project is a no regrets piece of work that can play a part in supporting the decarbonisation ambitions by providing more detail on the pathway to change, by highlighting additional work to be undertaken, and by showing alternative potential routes to change. So we believe that this, there's lots of value in this project, even though it is a short project. So I'll just pause there just for a moment. We don't have a specific question at this time, but in case there are any questions on the chat around the initial scope of the project. Okay, if not, Mikael, we can move on to the next slide.
Yes.
Fantastic. So the next two slides really cover the work we've already undertaken. So I've just been talking about the importance of the project from a market framework sort of change perspective. And yet on this first slide that you'll see, I'm showing you that, the work we've completed today has been focused on sort of physical rollout models. And I'll explain why that's the case. So as a starting point for the project, we felt we needed to engage on the question of different physical rollout models for hydrogen blending. The reason why we felt we needed to engage on this question, and that it was an appropriate starting point for the project, is because we believe that different physical rollout models for blending might require different levels of market change at different times. So by including physical rollout models work as a foundation of the project, it essentially adds more optionality to the final output. So as part of this exploration, we created a range of high-level rollout model options, which we then tested with our Gas Goes Green colleagues. We then agreed to take forward two of these options to be used as the basis for the timeline. And these are what we're calling sort of clusters and free market and clusters and strategic blending. And I'll go into more detail on the next slide. But really, the free market model is similar to the existing approach for biomethane connections. Developer chooses where to connect, network operators connect and manage. The strategic blending approach is where blending would take place at specific points on the network, more centralized top-down approach, but potentially offering higher upsides in carbon savings. And again, both of these models include clusters. So from there, once we defined our rollout models, we then undertook a high-level analysis of each of the models. So as part of the work, we developed a number of generic and rollout model specific assumptions. So we've had to make certain supply and demand assumptions. So on the supply side, we've assumed that there'll be a viable business model to incentivize hydrogen production. And then on the demand side, we're assuming that the safety case will be proven and that there is customer acceptance of blending. We've then created detailed benefits and challenges for each model. And I'll talk you through that on the next slide. And we've also created a rollout model timeline showing when we expect or certain projects to go live and connect. And then hopefully we can share that with you at post-event to get your feedback and thoughts on that. Because again, that will form part of then basis for our timeline with the market change included. So these are the components that have made up our rollout model analysis, which will form part of our final report. I think it's appropriate for me to say here now that the work we've completed on rollout models isn't meant to be completely comprehensive. More work will absolutely be required in this space to provide sort of further details like costings. And the rollout model work we've completed is an enabler to allow us to link it to that market change work. So I know there's potential for future phases of 2.1, which could include a deeper dive on physical rollout models. So I think it's a case of watch this space, but we know, I think, as a program of work, that there's more to do here.
Bill, are you including retail and shippers in the project?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes. So as part of what we're doing now, as part of this stage of the project, we're trying to sort of, we'll talk about our engagement approach later on in the slide pack, but absolutely we want to try and sort of engage with all across the value chain to get different views in. But again, as we go through hopefully the slides, you'll see our approach and how we're looking to sort of develop the timeline and how people can engage. So hopefully that might answer the question there, but if not, we can sort of cover back at the end.
And another question from Michael Wagner. Presumably a key issue is the rights and obligation of the connectee who has the responsibility to keep the gas specification in the pipes within limits. So who has that responsibility is his question.
So obviously there's the work that's going on in the GSMR space, which will form part of the timeline. We will need to sort of look into exactly, we'll have to look at our assumptions with regard to exactly where the essentially the roles and responsibilities lie, but I can sort of come back into that.
Okay, let me meanwhile go to the next slides, which gives more information on the models. And when going through these slides, maybe you can on the go include an answer to Fiona's question, which is free market model. Which one? Based on a new European Union UK trade and cooperation agreement, tariff-free based on US approach or a EU model or something else. So what about that free market model? But please integrate that when going through this slide.
Okay, I'll try and do that. So this slide really provides more detail on the analysis we've completed on the rollout models, and I'll be conscious that we spoke to sort of numerous stakeholders throughout our engagement period, and we haven't had the opportunity sort of to go into a low level of detail yet. So hopefully today can provide that sort of that visibility. So I'll talk to you through the rollout models more details, and then we've got a couple of questions then to sort of open up the debate. So from a strategic blending position, so in addition to the blending hydrogen at industrial clusters, a strategic blending approach would involve blending at specific defined locations on the network, and these locations will be chosen for their suitability to blend while optimizing the capacity of hydrogen that could be injected into the network. So again, some of the benefits of this we've looked at is, this actually could offer the potential to offer the greatest levels of hydrogen capacity into the network, and so that could lead to the largest carbon savings. It avoids the risk of potential network sterilisation if the appropriate regulatory change is enacted. But there are challenges, again, as with all models, and the centralized approach may result in significant regime change being required. So we know that both models will require a level of regime change, but it's questionable. Our assumption at the moment is that the strategic blending one could require a higher amount of market regime change. And again, hopefully maybe we can test this with your thoughts later on. And again, if it's a significant infrastructure requirement at certain locations around the country, then that could again result in higher challenges for environmental consent and public acceptance. So we have sort of quite a number of these benefits and challenges for each rollout model and assumptions, but hopefully this is starting to give you a flavour of the level we're sort of looking at from our sort of high level rollout model analysis. On the free market side, so in addition to blending again clusters, the free market approach would let the market decide where to inject into the network. So blending with producers apply wherever hydrogen production is most likely to be profitable. So for benefits here, we've highlighted that smaller connections could need less financing, and you might be able to get streamlined planning to deliver quicker connections compared to very large sites, and leaving investment decisions to market would, in theory, deliver the most economically efficient outcomes. Again, on the flip side of that, some of the challenges we've highlighted that there could be lower capacity and there's high potential for network sterilisation if small producers connect deep into the network, and this could result in large portion of the network being sterilised as a percentage of blend can't be proven. And there's also would need to be really clear alignment with the long-term hydrogen strategy to reduce the risk of stranded assets if producers connect where they deem it's most economically efficient. But who's to say that if that's the decarbonisation pathway that region will go down in the future? So
and then a question from Zoe. Are you or will you consider how these will work with local area energy planning, Bill?
So again, I think we are trying to keep this at a very high level to enable our work on market. So again, I'm sort of kind of nervous about going too far deep into the sort of physical rollout model work, because our focus, as I mentioned on the previous slide, is trying to highlight that market change required to remove the blockers from the market side. And this is the work we're trying to do is really sort of the highest level to build on the foundation of that. So we haven't actually taken that into account, but again, that's something we could look at. Are there any assumptions that we need to make around that point?
Okay, and then I think Laura's follow-up question falls in the same bucket, so I'm not going to bring that up with your permission, Laura. Going to Julie's question, do you consider the role of hydrogen production business models? They may determine types of hydrogen production that progress.
Yeah, that's our assumption, essentially, that the work that BEIS are doing on business models will define, essentially the business case for those production models. Absolutely.
Okay, and with that, I think you want to go to move to the first Paul EV question that we have for the participants, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've just got a couple of questions on rollout models. So the first one is in relation to the two models highlighted, and just to sort of get your initial sort of thoughts on which one you think would be the most viable, which one do you think would deliver the most benefits? So we've got sort of free market, strategic blending, and don't know. And this question has been posed again from that sort of physical infrastructure perspective. But I suppose if we boil it down, it's if you had to choose one to take forward, which one would you choose?
So again, go to paulev.com/GGGAG, where you already are and hopefully still are and stay for the rest of this meeting, and indicate which of the two rollout models highlighted you think is most viable. If the question is not clear, then please speak up and help Bill to phrase the question clearer. So should the question not be clear for this question, for all next questions, then just ask so that you are in a position to answer the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which of the two rollout models highlighted do you think is the most viable? I see we have 12 votes, so waiting for a couple more before I'm going to show where you think the viability lies. Okay, please continue voting while I already show the responses so that we can continue the discussion. I see strategic blending gets almost half of the votes and don't know gets more or less the other half. And I see the comment from Julie that the question is too simplistic. Now the point of getting comments on questions is always that you can learn a lot of that. So let's start there. Julie, what do you think? What's behind your remark about the simplicity of the question?
I think the key thing is to, as I said before, the business models will kind of drive what happens. So it kind of just very much links into that. You know, will we have business models that favour SMR, so large discrete projects in certain locations? Will we have models that support electrolyzers at a small scale initially scattered all over the place? So it's kind of a bit chicken and egg. So I don't really feel that I can answer this. It's sort of it depends. Viability, you know, practicality, achievability. There's too many unknowns at the moment.
And then I see Stephen say that the options are not mutually exclusive. I think Julie is talking along the same lines. Stephen, would you like to elaborate on that a bit? Maybe after unmuting.
Sorry, apologies. Yeah, no, I think, yeah, as it says, I think the two options can live next to each other. I don't think it's here on us at this time to define which options will be followed by the market participants.
Okay, and I think Chiara is saying something similar, saying we will probably end up having all types of business models. So I think both approaches may be needed. Time for Bill or Courtney or Edward to react, I guess.
Yeah, Mikhail, if I could just come in. I know that obviously quite a few people have don't know there. And yeah, it is very much chicken and egg on which route we go down. But obviously quite a few people have chosen strategic blending as the most preferred route. So I was just wondering if people could sort of express in the chat why they feel that strategic blending route would be the most viable to take forward, and that there is sort of small proportion that have chosen free market. So again, if people could express in the chat why they feel that this, you know, may encounter some challenge in terms of getting blended onto the network, it would be great to hear what people think.
Yeah, or just speak up now rather than putting it in the chat, I would say. So for those of you who voted strategic blending, let's collect a couple of arguments why you did so. Anyone?
I think it's probably about value for money, because you could maybe start with strategic blending and then move to a free market later, so that you know that you're doing it from a strategically, you know, opening points. So you've got set areas where you want to trial it in, that you start off strategically and you can test it. And then when you know it's working and you've got the model you want, you could then maybe move into a free market later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
thanks.
No, that's great.
Thanks. Any other arguments from somebody else in favor of strategic blending being the most viable model?
Michael's got his hand up.
Go ahead.
Hi, yes. So I'm not quite going to argue for one or the other. For me, I think the point is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to blend two different commodities into the pipeline, and that creates both a commercial challenge as well as a physical challenge. So the rights that you give the connectee are absolutely key here, because if you say effectively the connectees can put anything they want onto the system, then clearly you have to have a much more strategic approach to saying, can you put hydrogen or green gas onto the system there and it be safe, and the system operator be able to control that. You know, actually the rights and obligations that you're giving connectees are absolutely key. So, you know, you can go for a free market approach as long as actually you're not saying that you can just put anything you want onto the system. And these issues are also going to be very key to actually how you allow the market to operate. So I think there's quite a lot of interconnected issues here that we need to think through, because it's not like sort of electricity where an electron is the same as another. You have got two different commodities that have got both the commercial and physical issue associated with blending. And it is different. It should also flag from the sort of biomethane world where we're in at the minute, where actually the obligation is to bring the biomethane up to the same sort of levels of CV. So it's a very different world. So that was my point.
Thanks. Let's take reactions from Liam and then from Scott, and then go back to Bill. Liam?
I'd agree. There's plenty. There's options. There's different ways it can be done, and I think both are viable options. One thing I would say is in terms of, I think that when this needs to be achieved by is a really critical factor in how successful it needs to be and to what extent it needs to be delivered. If you're talking about delivering major transition changes within the next decade or 2 decades to very high proportions, or even to getting very high proportions by 2050 even, then I think the strategic blending option is the more viable option, purely because there aren't many free market options that would work with the regulatory mechanisms we currently have amongst the networks, and the ways in which the end customers, both industrial and domestic consumers, operate and make choices about energy supply. I'm not sure there's any examples of that sort of transition happening on a free market basis that quickly.
Thanks. Let's go to Scott and then ask Bill and Courtney and Edward to react. Scott, I think you put in 2 comments in the chat. Maybe you can briefly summarize them.
Okay, it was more just a post it up and read it yourself. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think there's what we don't want to have as barriers, and this is probably just a kind of code or standards kind of issue. There's likely to be, by the time, I mean, the aim here is a network transition, but so code development along with that is going to be hydrogen hubs, probably driven by local authorities, initially for the purposes of decarbonising transport, but also kind of gas assets that the councils operate to meet their own net zero goals. So, we're going to have these kind of islands, if you like, within the system where we have a green or mainly green hydrogen kind of generation going on, and that's capturing that local market for that generation. What we don't want is a barrier for injection of that asset into a national grid.
Okay. Bill, what did you learn from this discussion? How are you going to move forward?
Yeah, no, thanks for the comments. That they are really useful. And again, I think some of them we are aware of with regard to sort of the uncertainty of the models at the moment. We felt we needed to, in order to try and sort of create this pathway, we felt that even though there isn't that certainty and absolutely could be a hybrid of the 2 models going forward, we felt that we needed to engage in the question to try and highlight the fact that there could be different, it could be different market change required to facilitate these different models. But I think, we've got some really strong feedback there. And again, I think the way we sort of present this work will need to, be at the right level to really highlight that this is, there is a lot of uncertainty at the moment. There is a lot of other work going on which could provide more certainty down the line. But this is, we're trying to engage on this question to try and facilitate our market work. So thank you all for the comments.
And with that, with your permission, Bill, I'm going to not ask the next question, but move on to the next slide in view of time.
Absolutely,
which is about a project approach, and a different than you may think. After that, the legislation example comes, and then we pull again.
Yes, fantastic. Thanks, Mikael. So yeah, so this really is a representation of how we built our project, and hopefully you can sort of see how it sort of starts to hang together now. So we have the rollout models, which are essentially the foundation, and then we've highlighted a number of what we term sort of market pillars. So legislation, regulation, license, UNC, and safety. And then each related to then each of these pillars, we have a number of key change activities. And the key change activity is essentially an umbrella term to manage the scope of change. And then these key change activities can be mapped to a timeline. So I take sort of just a couple of examples. On the safety pillar, you know, that safety is the pillar, but then the change activities related that could be sort of GSMR change, safety case change, COMA reg change. And it's the same with the code pillar, you know, that could incorporate UNC and IGT UNC change. It could potentially highlight an enduring code change required or an interim change required. So each of these pillars will have a number of related change activities. Then the key thing really then is sitting behind each of these change activities will be a host of detail. And this is what we're researching now. And I'll show you an example of on the next slide of how we're trying to do that research. But what we want to try and explore really is the issues and blockers related to the change activities. Are there any ongoing projects which could also look to answer the questions in this space? What are the gaps and what are the next steps? What is the sequencing of the activities? This is a real crucial part for any timeline, to understand the sequencing and the options around sequencing. Do the change activities have dependencies? You know, for example, is code and license change dependent on primary legislation? What's a realistic expectation of the duration of the activities? Again, to try and map onto the time. You know, if we're showing that blending can't happen till, you know, much later in the decade, then that sort of opens up a number of questions about what we can do now to try and move those timelines forward. And then finally, are there any specific aspects linked to a rollout model, or are the activities generic and required in all scenarios? So you can start to see how we're building sort of up from our rollout models through the market pillars to define the change activities. From there, we'll deep dive into each of them to do that research, and then that should allow us then to choose the appropriate place on the timeline for that change activity. So we did have another couple of questions, but Michael, I'm thinking we should maybe just carry on, and we can maybe cover some of the questions later, because I still would like to sort of get to the later questions. So yes, so brilliant. So this slide is an example of how we're undertaking our research activities. So again, we wanted to try and provide you with as much detail as possible to give you that visibility and transparency of our thinking. So now I'll quickly talk you through this example. So we've got market pillar legislation. The change activity is to investigate if there are any barriers in primary legislation that could impede blending. And then on the left-hand side there, we've highlighted 4 research areas, and there are actually many more, as I alluded to in the previous slide. And then in this example, we've tried to highlight the overarching scope of the change activity. Why is it important? So does primary legislation need to change to enable blending? If that's a yes, then that could be a massive impact on associated dependencies, and there'll be a massive impact then on the timeline output. So that's why we need to do the research. We might not be able to get to that answer, but we might then be able to highlight that future work is required to try and get to that answer. So again, that could lead to alternative optionality in the timeline. We also then wanted to highlight, you know, if there are any existing projects being undertaken. So, you know, for this example, we know there's some work going on, but then that also leads itself to other outstanding questions that the project team then need to try and answer. Then duration, timeliness of the work. Again, this will have a big impact on the timeline. Estimating these correctly will be an important component of our output. And then finally, you know, are there rollout model specific change? So, you know, this example, if strategic blending option is the strategic blending option fully compatible with all primary legislation, e.g., let's say the Competition Act. If it's not, or if we don't think that's the case, then that will have, you know, clear ramifications either for the timeline, for the rollout model, or for the framework itself. So again, if we can try and highlight some of these barriers in the final report, that could then sort of drive sort of future feasibility work around this question. So hopefully you can start to see now how the research undertaken will influence the timeline, and hopefully will deliver that sort of valuable end product. So we just move on to the next slide. Thanks.
Yes, and I see some questions and answers in the chat, and I'm assuming that if a question is answered by Courtney and I don't hear of it anymore, that is fine. So if you want to discuss it further, then please speak up. Meanwhile, Bill, I don't think you want to poll on this question, or do you?
No, I think we'll
huh?
move on to the next slide, and there's a number of questions off the next slide again where we can maybe try and do some polling. So again, we wasn't sure quite how long this would take, so we had a range of questions sort of prepared. So yeah, so this is our initial thinking really, and this is sort of the penultimate slide I want to talk through. But I just want to share that sort of initial high level sort of key aspects. So the first thing I wanted to mention is that we're thinking, the current thing at the moment is that 2023 will be a crucial milestone year to enable blending. So why do we think that? So there's expected completion of high deploy and potential for proving the safety case for blending. And we could see then further policy clarity on blending with BEIS through their CBA work. So if we're correct in our assumptions about 2023, and we'll get your views on that in a minute, then that could lead to very different alternative pathways to delivering the required market change. And again, this is really early thinking, but we could end up with sort of two options here, where you could end up with a low risk option where the majority of market change work starts post 2023, where there is the additional clarity and additional certainty for the industry. But then this could lead to elongated timescales and the slower decarbonisation reward. Alternatively, there could be a higher risk option where work could be undertaken before there's that full certainty, either sort of prior to 2023 or completed simultaneously, and then that could sort of deliver a quicker decarbonisation reward. So obviously in the future, the reality will be that there'll be a mix of both these scenarios, but you start to see how our thinking will be that 2023 will be that milestone year, and actually, we can maybe sort of highlight on the timeline what can be done before 2023 from a feasibility perspective, whilst also sort of realising that a lot of the work will need to take place after 2023, and then understanding whether that can be undertaken simultaneously or whether it has to be done after each other will be a really important part. And again, will potentially highlight when we can actually realistically expect to see sort of the full framework completed for blending.
So somehow,
so
Bill, you seem to think that 2023 is a crucial year, and that it could bring clarity enabling decisions. But let's test whether the participants feel the same. So let's go to Paul EV again. Same link, Paul EV/GGGAG. And the question is, do you, like Bill, think that 2023 will bring clarity enabling decisions? Or maybe do you not? I see two people have already voted. So yes, no, or don't know, please. So do you think 2023 is really that special year that will bring clarity enabling decisions? Please, yes, no, or don't know. I see voting is going on. Thanks for that. I'm aware that we have some points in the chat that we'll get at later. 14 votes already, 15, 16. Please continue voting while I already show the results and while we're having a discussion on these. It's a bit a mixed bag. Around half of the people doesn't really know. More people think yes than no. Let's maybe start with a few of the no's. So for those of you who voted no, I don't think so. Could you give the reasons for that? Just by speaking up, please. So first of all, Julie says 2023 seems to be a huge challenge when INC work only just starting. Anything else?
I was going to say the same thing. We haven't done a lot of research into blending into INC, which doesn't give us much time between now and 23. And I'm still not clear as to what the decisions will be in 2023. So I think we know people want to make some decisions in 2023, but what are those decisions going to be?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Is it a national decision? Is it a local decision? Is it a small part of a distribution network decision? Those bring different levels of complexity with them.
Any other reason for saying no? Likely 2023 will not bring that. Will not be that special year, bringing clarity, enabling decisions. Then many of you also voted yes. So for those of you voting yes, would you have other reasons than the reasons already shared by Bill to vote yes? Please speak up again. Then I think you covered the reasons for the yes well, but half of the people don't know. Now I can imagine that some of you just don't know because, well, you just don't know, but maybe others don't know whether because you think it's trade-off, and there's insights that you can share of the unclarity. So if you have any insights that you can share on why you voted don't know, please do so. Fiona said it depends at which level you look at. She said yes, because she thinks future legislation on the European Union exit will be clearer, but she agrees with the no answers on local levels. Okay. Any further insight on this question? No. Then let's move on to the next question. The next question is, what do you believe is the most important enabler for hydrogen blending? Is it policy? Is it safety? Is it market? Is it a combination of those, or don't you know? And this time before voting, maybe, Bill, could you briefly explain what falls under policy, safety, and market for you, so that that's well defined?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the previous slide, I talked about sort of obviously, potentially a CBA for BEIS and sort of more sort of policy clarity with the hydrogen strategy of, and the business model work over the next sort of 2 years. The safety case being proven obviously will actually, we think will be really important with regard to sort of, the work that's going on with high deploy. And then obviously there's all the market frameworks that sort of, that we are going to be focused on. And again, I think it's, we think it's a really important aspect, obviously, of what the change that needs to be happen. So this is just to sort of understand, whether people have any views on that, or whether, it's sort of that combination of all of them, or actually, again, we don't know. And I think what's coming across, and just on the other questions really is, we do appreciate that, there is still a lot of uncertainty with regard to how blending could evolve and could sort of take off. But I would just go back and just highlight that this timeline work isn't, it won't. The timeline won't be 100% perfect. We know that, but essentially, it could highlight some sort of key work to be undertaken in the next sort of 12 months. That again, that could provide that more clarity from the market's perspective. To really go back to that very first slide, we really have to try and make sure that the market frameworks are not a blocker to the policy, to the innovation work, and that's what we're trying to do. Okay, with that, please all vote. I think some of you have already done so, but please all vote. And there's also the option F, Victoria brought in the chat, which is consumer buy-in. So if you want to vote on option F, like Victoria's comment in the chat, I think logistically that's the best we can do now. So vote in poll EV on what you believe is the most important enabler for hydrogen blending. Should you think that it is option F, consumer buy-in, then like Victoria's comment in the chat, please. And I think we have 18 votes, so I'm going to show the results. It's a combination or it's policies with 3 votes for consumer buy-in, 4 points for consumer buy-in. Anything you want to say on that, Bill, or any follow-up question that you would have on that? No, I think, absolutely, that makes a lot of sense with regards to combination. Again, obviously, policy will be a key aspect of that, with the output from BEIS. And I suppose from our side of things, our expectation with this question actually was that markets would be quite low, but actually it is, and this part of the thing that we need to sort of try and sort of get across really is the importance of that, and the importance of making sure that change is done in a timely way, as I've mentioned, to sort of enable blending when the time comes, when the other aspects have been agreed. Okay, but I guess summarizing, it's a combination or it's policy. Policy maybe being the most important one, as Julie says. Without policy, none of the rest matters, but deliverable, we need all. Yeah. With that, let's go to the next question. Go ahead. Yeah. No, that's fine. Again, so again, we've put a number of questions, and again, like obviously as we've sort of covered, I feel that the sort of the message we're getting is around that sort of uncertainty and sort of the unknown, and I appreciate that. So we can go through the questions, or if we've, depending on how time is running, we can go on to the last slide.
Yeah, I think we do one more question, then we see whether there are things in the chat still to be covered, and then we go to the last slide if you're okay with that, Bill.
Yeah, perfect.
And I think the next question on low risk, high risk is the one you are most eager to deal with. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We have started to get this initial thinking, and again, to see whether people have any views on that, to see whether people would almost be comfortable with trying to do work in the market space earlier. That would be useful for us to understand if there is that sort of appetite and buy-in. So the question is, which of the two alternative initial pathways do you think best enables blending? Is that a low risk initial pathway or a high risk initial pathway? Now, I always get a bit confused by all the pathways and what a low risk and high risk pathway is. So please remind all of us what you mean with these two. Yeah, so again, we've just started to put this thing together, so I appreciate that. So the low risk one is really where essentially you almost wait until 2023, you wait until we get clarity on all the things we've talked about, around policy, around safety, around sort of industrial and commercial users, around sort of consumer buy-in, and sort of you wait to get a lot more clarity, and then you start doing the market work, which then could lead to elongated timescales, which but that might be absolutely acceptable if that's the approach sort of industry wants to go down. But then there's also the what I've called we term the higher risk, which is essentially trying to front end some more work and do work before 2023 to try and do that feasibility, to try and sort of to try and do as much front end work as we can to try and remove the barriers, any barriers before before they become a barrier essentially.
Okay. Thanks. So if you have an opinion, which of the two alternative initial pathway, low risk or high risk, do you think best enables blending? I see we have 8 votes. I'm going for a couple more before showing the results. So please continue voting. And then I will give the floor to Mike, who raised his hand. But let's first finish this voting. Let me share how you voted. I think that is quite clear preference for high risk. Any substantiation from those of you who voted on high risk? So for those of you who voted high risk, why did you do so?
Mikkel, if I can come in, it's Mike Foster. The risk that we run here is that we're trying to see this in isolation and not look at what alternatives are also being proposed. And at the moment, those who do not believe in a long-term future role for green gas are arguing that they should start decarbonising now. And if we hesitate, if we delay, if we wait till 2023 and then start thinking about how we're going to do the blending, we'll miss an opportunity, we'll miss several years of delivery. And that's just giving further ammunition to those people who say, we've got the appliances now, i.e., use an example, heat pumps. Why don't we just start installing heat pumps in far greater numbers? And it would be a real mistake for our industry to sit back and wait. We need to be on the front foot, not on the back foot.
Bill?
Yeah, fantastic. That absolutely mirrors sort of my personal opinion on that point. Absolutely.
I'm trying to understand what it concretely means, Mike. So what would that look like?
Say it again, Mikkel, sorry.
I'm trying to imagine what that concretely means. So what's the practical consequence of what you are saying? Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Well, at the moment, if you those who don't believe in a gas future, they're arguing that hydrogen is many years away. And if we're serious about achieving net zero, we should start to decarbonise using the appliances in the home that are available on the market now. They ignore the fact that electricity isn't decarbonised. That's they missed the point on that. But it's a very powerful tool that's being picked up by policymakers. And the fear I have is that we're giving ground by taking a more cautious route, the low risk route. Whereas if we did front load some work so that we could start very quickly blending, we can turn round to those who don't believe in a green gas future and demonstrate that at scale we are looking to decarbonize the network. And that's the beauty of the blending. It can deliver at scale without the consumer doing anything. And we must not lose that prize.
I
Thanks.
think,
Yeah. Go ahead.
John Rees from Community Housing Cymru. I think as well, it's we need to get ahead because it's about getting the data on decarbonisation, because in Wales, the Welsh Government have now got a decarbonisation minister. They're really looking at it. They're looking at retrofitting homes, to lower carbon efficiency, and electricity is because they've been out there more, is being floated more at the moment as a solution that's got data. So I really think that we need to be getting data on blending, and if blending can, could solve some problems about the consumers having to pay for it, because it's already just being put into the gas mains anyway. So I really do think that we need to get ahead, because ultimately it's giving the consumer choice and value for money, and we really need to get data on it quickly to understand it, how it's going to work going forward.
Okay, thanks. And Lennart, I have a question for you. Lennart, please check in the chat whether there are one or two questions or remarks that Courtney hasn't covered yet and that we should do in the end. So we'll do a couple of things and then I get to you for this question. With that, Scott asks whether with blending we mean up to 20% hydrogen and X% biomethane within the existing methane network. Bill?
Yes, essentially. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, maybe I've just put in the chat there that it's up to 20% hydrogen, and that means that it doesn't compromise any sort of household appliances. And then above that point, that's when we would need to start changing out boilers, for example.
Okay, and what's X in X% biomethane? Is X 100?
I think the X just means whatever sort of blend of biomethane a connection would be putting into a network there. I don't think it refers to a specific number.
Okay. Then let's go to the last slide that Bill intended to present. We are skipping some questions, but that's because of the much input and discussion we had earlier on. So in that sense, thank you very much. Bill, what is the current status and how will this continue?
Yeah, fantastic. So the current status is obviously is that we are in the research mode and very much engagement mode, and we are trying to gather the data to allow us to plot, to plot out an indicative timeline that then can be tested with stakeholders. We're absolutely sort of trying to ramp up our engagement activities. Obviously, here today we've been to the Future Gas Steering Group and the Base Blending Group, and we will try and look for the most appropriate time to have a stakeholder session where we can sort of have an open discussion and we can share our outputs share our timeline outputs in more detail. We are trying to work at pace, and we are trying to sort of, we believe that we can deliver that really useful output, showing those multiple pathways and the narrative behind the timelines. And I suppose I would just thank everyone for their input. Really useful, and it's, we've been able to take a lot from today. If anyone would like to speak to us, we'd love to speak to you afterwards. I'll just have a chat, to go into more detail on a specific point. Please don't hesitate to get in contact with any member of the team. And then I think we've just got two more questions really on how you'd like us to engage with you from the project side. So really just two very quick ones. So if when we produce the timeline, we're looking at the still open question about whether we should do a sort of a formal consultation or whether it's or whether it's informal engagement mechanism. So I suppose the first question is would your organisation be interested in sort of responding to a formal consultation, so we know whether we need to sort of whether there's value going for that process. So that would be useful for us to know.
Bill, in view of time, I don't think we'll do these questions anymore. If you allow me to. I do think that the discussion showed that there's a lot of appetite to discuss this further. And Julie's question exemplifies that. She's asking, will stakeholder engagement be before or after delivery of the draft report in July?
So the stakeholder engagement is absolutely happening now. We've had lots of sort of, as I mentioned, we've been to numerous forums, we've had bilateral discussions. So again, I think it's an open question about whether to do a stakeholder forum. It will probably be around the same time as we have the draft outputs, really. So, and again, so we can get that input in before we finalise. So I would expect it to be around the sort of towards the latter half of July would be my expectation.
Then I see a lot of chats coming in about X, actually. So the percentage of biomass that can be blended in, the total amount of biogas, I should say, the total amount of biomethane. I should have said the total amount of biomethane that would have been available. I'm giving these to you for your consideration, but let's not discuss them now.
Yeah.
Then I see Victoria's question with regards to blending. Are there any projects that are looking specifically at the impacts of blending on INC customers?
So yeah, so again, my understanding is that high deploy phase 3 will look at the impact on INC customers, on DN INC customers, and that Future Grid will essentially will prove out we'll try and do something in that space in phase 2. But again, I'm not sort of across or essentially all of the projects in that space. But yeah, so if anyone else wants to.
Yeah, sorry, Bill. It was a question to the. I know this isn't you. It's just while I was thinking, if we've got till 2023, but we haven't. High deployed 2 is just about to start. So if we're not starting INC until 12 months later with high deploy 3. I didn't know, I wasn't aware of any other projects, but it was more a question to the wider group if there were any other projects. I think Danielle's got a hand up.
Yeah,
Danielle?
thanks, Victoria. Yeah, so National Grid does have a project that's just kicking off at the moment. So it follows on from the previous de-blending project that we ran. The next phase is to look at blending and de-blending from a market's perspective, but also the technical perspective. And one of the work streams there is really to do that customer mapping across the grid, really understand who's connected, what the barriers are, and go out and speak to them all. So absolutely, that's happening this year. So you'll probably hear about that very soon, Victoria.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
Thanks. Lennart, are there 1 or 2 questions in the chat that we should still deal with?
I think it's been very well covered so far, and there are a couple of comments, as you said, that are good to document, and we will keep them in mind. But the questions have mostly been answered by Courtney. Good.
Thanks. Then thanks for this lively engagement again. I think this was insightful. I think this was helpful for the workstream team. I think it also showed that not everything is known yet. But thank you all for the active engagement. And of course, thanks Bill and Courtney for your contribution orally and via the chat.
Thank you very much for everyone's time.
With that, let's go to the second big block that we wanted to cover in this session, which is about the deliverable of workstream 6.1, which is about green gas and power generation data. Bethan Winter will talk about that. She is system operation managers at Wales and West Utilities. We have seen her before in November in the advisory group, but this time she will talk about something different. Basically, what she will be talking about is what data would be helpful to make available so that the progress that gas networks are making towards the transition becomes visible. And that, of course, leads to the question then, what is that contribution that gas networks are making to the transition? So we start relatively high over and then go to the data needs. With that, without further ado, Bethan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mikhail, and morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm sure somebody will tell me if you can't. Yeah, so thanks for your time this morning. As Mikhail has mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about a project that we're doing to look at what data might be useful to share more widely. So starting with the pathway to net zero that you can see on the slide in front of you there. You can see at the moment our network is predominantly natural gas. We do have an amount of biomethane which is already coming in through all of the different networks, but the volumes are still fairly low. We're doing a lot of work to try and increase that to make processes easier for biomethane to come in, which Tom has mentioned earlier. And also we've obviously got the work going on with blending now so that we can start hopefully getting more quantity or higher quantities of hydrogen coming into the network as we move towards the mid-2020s. You can see from the summation of that graph at the top that the overall demand is assumed to reduce a little with increasing efficiencies and people using appliances in different ways or maybe having different appliances, so that by the time we get to 2050, if not before, we've got a wholly green decarbonised gas network made up of hydrogen and biomethane. So what we thought, if we can move to the next slide, please, Mikhail.
There you go.
Thank you. What has become apparent really is that we're talking about all of this work that we're doing. We have vast amounts of data within each of the GDNs associated with power generation, green gas going forward. I mean, we're already starting to get some speculative inquiries about hydrogen blending. We've got transport hubs wanting to use biomethane at the moment and talking to us about hydrogen in the future. And all of these things are coming into the networks, but probably aren't being shared at all. And clearly, because of anonymity, which is something we'll come on to later, it's not data that we can just purely kind of make available for everybody. But there are some key messages that come out of that, and I think everybody having more visibility of what was actually happening would probably help people in determining what they think is the best way forward and being able to see where most progress is being made. So 6.1, this work group has been put together with a target audience of industry and people like yourselves. We're looking to collect network data and then present the findings with infographics. And some of the sort of data that we're thinking about using is listed there. So you can see percentage metallic in the network, which would help people understand how hydrogen ready we are. Connected and commissioned green gas sites, power generation. Again, I'm guessing most people will understand the link here with power generation and decarbonisation. But just to clarify that, really, we're seeing a huge increase in the number of small flexible power generation sites that are connecting to the gas distribution networks. I think there's a number of drivers for that, but clearly intermittency with increasing amounts of wind and solar means that it's really important that we've got some fast acting generation which can kind of plug the gaps when it's not sunny and not windy. And as EV use grows, then clearly there's even higher demands for electricity which need to be met. On the right hand side there we've got, I mentioned CNG for transport, so these blending inquiries which are more speculative at the moment, SMR inquiries, and then CHP networks using gas is something else that we're anticipating more of, although currently that data is quite difficult to separate out from other connections data. If we can move on, please. Okay, thank you. So what we've been doing so far as networks, we've been getting together and we've produced some standard templates. You can imagine we all have, our own systems where connection inquiries are kind of processed through, and then those get passed on to different departments as sites are being connected and monitored. So we've really had to go right back to the basics and just say, how can we as networks standardize that data? What can we provide? What is it going to be easily available and what isn't? And then from that, what we'd like to do is filter down and actually say to people like yourselves, well, this is what we can provide, but what would be useful? And that's what we're hoping to get out of today. We've talked a bit about standardization of kind of equivalence metrics. So when we share information in our reports at Wales and Western, and I think it's it's not something just that we do, I think it's something that a lot of networks do, we would try and put an equivalent in. So an amount of green gas might be sufficient to decarbonise, say 100,000 homes, which actually hopefully gives that a bit of meaning. I think people that are in the industry and used to this data will know exactly what, you know, however many terawatt hours of biomethane equates to. But I think for others, it's really useful to have an equivalence. But again, it's something that we may be struggling with in terms of what would people find useful and how should we approach that. And I mentioned the discussion around anonymity requirements. So, you know, what we really don't want to do is be making data available that customers wouldn't want to be made available, that isn't already in the public domain. On the other hand, it is really useful, I think, to be able to see trends about certain locations that are seeing more growth than others, you know, whether more people are going to low pressure, connecting to low pressure or high pressure networks, etc. So I think it's how we make the data useful without giving away kind of more data than we should. Design and dashboards versus infographics. Again, we're only, yeah, that's fine. Okay, yeah, we can go over to that now. Like I say, we're really at the early stages at the moment because we've been focusing on the data rather than how we display it. So the sorts of dashboards that we've got at the minute are very basic, literally, you know, how many new sites have we had, how many total sites have we had, we've split that by type. So we've got tables and graphs. I think in some ways it would be very useful to have something that's a little bit more appealing in terms of the infographics, and I think they featured strongly in that question we asked earlier about how data would be best presented. I guess for people that are going to use the data for analysis, then actually sometimes a table is the best thing, because then you can do exactly what you like with the data. So it might be that we do both, but useful to hear your feedback as we get into the discussion now. So I think that really sums up kind of what I was going to say, and I think we're going to move across to get some feedback from you. Is there anything I've missed then, Gail?
Yeah, and I think ultimately, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bethan, ultimately what you're really after is to understand data that can be used to show, to demonstrate the progress gas networks are making towards their role in net zero, right? So what data should that be?
Yeah.
And I think earlier on the slide here, on the bottom side, you already have some options, the 8 bullets that we see there. And what we are going to do now is we are going to ask the participants again in poll EV, but this time in a different way. I think people already started. What data could we best show to demonstrate the progress gas networks are making towards their role in net zero? This is a two-step process. First, we pre-populated the 8 bullets that you just saw and that Bethan has talked about. But please do add your own options if you have more options, if there's more data that you think should be shown to demonstrate the progress gas networks are making. And then, and you can already start with that, but then please upvote or downvote whether you which of these data sources you think are most important. For me, there's no need for you to know where that data could come from. That is a later problem. So for now, please just assume ideal world, all data would be available. What is the data that could be best shown to demonstrate the progress gas networks are making towards their role in net zero? Is the question clear for everybody? I already see a lot of voting, but is the question clear to everybody? Good. Then please continue voting. Some of you who are working on their phone might need to load responses to be able to upvote or downvote all entries. So make sure that you see all, that you have the opportunity to thumbs up or thumbs down all of these by clicking on the load more responses button. And with that, I see a lot of voting. I see a lot of input. I also see 2 clear winners. But let's see what happens when the voting continues. Let's also see whether you added more. So connected commissioned green gas to show the percentage of gas mains that are ready to carry hydrogen, CNG for transport, blending inquiries, if possible, the carbon intensity per energy unit consumption related, blending inquiries, CHP and networks using gas, the number of projects blending around the country, percentage of metallics in the network, SMR inquiries, generation profile from data loggers, and not that much support for contracted commissioned power generation. So let's give you a little bit more time to finish the voting, and then we go to the follow-up question on this. And you can vote up and down as often as you like. So what is the data that really should be there? I think it's rare that I see when I use this tool actually quite often, and I think it's rare that I see such a distinct curve of top votes and a more or less flat top 6 and further. So that's interesting. I think the voting is more or less done. I think a lot of you voted, so thank you for that. The first thing I'm going to ask you, Bethan, regardless of data availability, whether you can react on this, I think, very clear answer that the stakeholders have given.
Yeah,
So,
I think.
what does this mean for you? Did you expect this? Do you have follow-up questions to better understand? I think the percentage of gas mains that are ready to carry hydrogen is a new one. The number 3 as well. Go ahead.
Sorry, so percentage of gas mains, I mean, that's a derivative of the percentage metallic that we had. So I think that's absolutely fine. I think that is what we were expecting. The carbon intensity is useful, and I think that is something that we could probably look at. Would you mind scrolling down so I can just see what's at the bottom of the screen, please? I don't know if I'm zoomed in or.
Of course. There you go.
What was at the end?
This is it.
Yeah. Would I be able to have a bit more information on that? So I think the target data for net zero is unachievable, but the litmus test will always be via. Is that just industrial data? It seems to be going off the screen as the most challenging area.
So that's about, I think the target for net zero is unachievable, but the litmus test will always be via industrial data as the most challenging area. Let me propose something different here. If the one who put this in could maybe announce that, and then I connect it to with you offline. Does that work? So who is the one who provided this input? Are you comfortable speaking up?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Who are you?
Do you want me to comment on it?
Briefly, yes, please.
Okay, all right. I think net zero is pretty much unachievable for gas goes green. I've always said this because of Scope 3 emissions. It doesn't mean to say that it's not a worthwhile project, but I think the industrial area is definitely the most challenging. So in terms of sort of setting targets where you're going to have progress, I do think it's via the industrial areas rather than through domestic.
Okay, and with that,
I'm not saying what the source is. I know that's very generic, but.
And with that, Bethan, can I suggest that the two of you pick this up further offline so that we can focus on the more prioritized entries in this session further?
Yes, of course. Yes, thank you.
Okay. And then my question to you, Bethan, is for the, let's say, top 5, would you know where to find this data? I ask people to put in ideal world and not to bother whether this data is available. So maybe they provided input where you think, okay, I also don't know where to find that data, and then let's see whether the participants to this call can help you. So are there in the top 5 suggestions for data where you think where you would need help to see where to find that?
No, I think the top 5 are probably things that we've already got. So I think that's not really a challenge. I think the one we struggle with, which I mentioned briefly before, and if anybody does have a good data source, it would be useful, is the CHP networks using gas. And I think, it's whether they're using gas as their primary source or whether they're using that. And in fact, where it says CHP networks using gas, I'm assuming that's heat networks. Is that right? Is that what was meant there? CHP for heat networks.
Katie, can you answer that question? After muting, Katie?
Yes, I think it was. Yes, Bethan.
Yeah, okay. So I think that I think heat networks, like I say, we don't always have visibility of them when they come in. It's not something that we capture at the moment. So the ones that are out there, we wouldn't necessarily know about, I don't think. And I think it's quite difficult for us to know then I think going forward will improve how we capture data, but whether that CHP is a backup that they're only going to use at peak, or when when the network is struggling and they can use it in conjunction with something else, or whether that is your primary source of heat. So from a modelling perspective and a data provision perspective, we probably need to do a bit more work there. So if anybody does know about any good data in that area, then I'd really appreciate a call about that, please.
Okay, so please, if you do, either put it in the chat or give Bethan a call, please. Then let's go to Scott's comment in the chat, where basically he says, in terms of to show the percentage of gas mains that are ready to carry hydrogen, it would need to be clear about the mix level. So is it 20, 50, or max 100%?
Yeah, that's a fair point. So I think what we've been thinking about here was pure hydrogen. And so it was, at the moment, it would be largely our PE networks, because those are the networks that we have the most confidence in. I think as further work is done with high deploy and other projects, then I guess we might need to split that down for blends. And also where we find that certain types of metallic pipes can transport hydrogen safely, even when it's pure hydrogen. I think that's probably something that would, say, as the research is completed, I think the amount of data and type of data we could provide would increase. I think on day one, we could say it would probably be percentage PE, and that would be full hydrogen then.
Okay, thanks, and thanks Liam for the suggestion on a data source for Bethan. Any other question or remark from any of the participants about what we delivered? Then let's do 2 poll questions briefly after each other to help Bethan further in seeing what you would need. So what's the best minimum frequency of data updates? Would that be quarterly, 6 monthly, or yearly? What would be your preference? Please let us know. And let's do these 2 polls quickly, also in view of time. So minimum frequency of data updates, quarterly, 6 monthly, yearly. I am going to show the result already in light of speeding up. So I think the brief gist of this is yearly is definitely insufficient. Quarterly would be best, 6 monthly maybe also still acceptable, but not yearly, please. With that, let's go to the next question. And what's the best level of data disaggregation? I saw some comments already about this in the chat. So is that at the level of the local distribution zone? Is that at a network level, or is that at the UK level? What do you think is the best level of data disaggregation? Local distribution zone, network level, or UK level? Let's again see how you are voting. Okay. Also pretty outspoken today. Local distribution zone, I think, is the clear preference that we see here. Bethan, what do you think? Is that achievable?
I think on the whole it will be. I think, as I mentioned, it probably comes down to anonymity. So if there are any data types where you've only got, a few, then I think that's something that we probably want to have a look at. But I think most of the data that we prepare as gas networks comes in as a local distribution zone, and then we would be aggregating it up to network or UK level. So yeah, that should be fine, I think.
Okay, good. And then Fraser has the comment, has a further suggestion on how to get your data. I am assuming that is clear, so thank you for that data point, and let us know or let Fraser know if you have questions on that, Bethan.
Thank you.
We actually have one more question. So to illustrate that question, this is a slide that Bethan has already presented. One of the points she made is that they are having discussions about standardization of equivalence metrics, for example, sufficient green gas to decarbonize heat for 5 to 20,000 homes. To kind of make the data more meaningful than just numbers, and to help people to see what that actually means. So, for example, it could be that the data becomes more meaningful by making a comparison that a smaller biosite provides sufficient green gas to heat around 5,000 homes. The question we have to you now, and this time please put your examples in the chat. The question we have to you now, for those data points that you discussed, and I will go back to the slides to show the voting on that. But for those data points that we discussed, What do you think the team can do to make this data more meaningful by presenting it in equivalencies that people would easily be able to imagine? Is that a good way of introducing the question, Bethan?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. I hope that also applies to the participants. So I'm showing again what data could be used. You had a clear preference for connected and commissioned green gas, and to show the percentage of gas mains that are ready to carry hydrogen, a couple of others. So please put in the chat what the team can do to make that data more meaningful than just numbers where people might struggle to imagine what it actually means. Julie says a town, city of the size of whatever. Laura said you would need to be very specific about what you mean with smaller. Yes, I think that is true. Any other input on how we can make this data, the top rank data, how we can make that meaningful to the wider audience by putting it in perspective? Please put it in the chat or just speak up. I think this is it. If you have further ideas, please continue to put it in the chat or reach out to Bethan directly or to the Gas Goes Green team, please. With that, thank you, Bethan, for your presentation. I hope I see Mike adds use average UK consumption from Ofgem as a basis of the on a per home basis. I hope that you got a steer that is useful for you from the advisory group, or you got advice that is useful for you from the advisory group and helps you to develop this further. And for all in the advisory group, if you have further data sources, also please let Bethan know. Thank you, Bethan.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
And with that, we are close to closing off, but not entirely yet. I postponed a comment that Jonathan made early on in the session on the safety issue that Tom mentioned. Jonathan, is there something you want to elaborate on at this moment?
Well, I could just say that I'm still rather concerned that we haven't heard much from HSE about the potential increased risk that will happen. Some people would say there's probably an unacceptable level at the moment of incidents of domestic gas explosions, and it's a question of the severity of these explosions as well as their frequency. So, something that perhaps models or compares the current risk with methane in the domestic supply to the risks that we might be looking at with 100% hydrogen, bearing in mind that various risk mitigating measures are going to be put in place.
Okay, Tom, I think that, Jonathan made that comment when you discussed the work in workstream 5. So I guess this is something to take into consideration in that workstream, right?
Yes, thanks, Jonathan. I think it's a good point, and certainly something we in the networks are keeping firmly in mind. I think as the network work and evidence building continues, the networks and indeed the whole of the hydrogen industry is really engaging with HSE to demonstrate the case for safety and to make the case that it is or can be managed in a way that's as safe as natural gas. This will build on the learning from High Deploy, the trials at Kiel there, but also on the hyperheat work.
I do hope there are not going to be any more PR cock-ups. Like, see, we saw Anne-Marie Trevelyan welcoming the fact that those dummy demonstration houses outside Gateshead were going to have gas hobs in them. And it was like, no, surely not. Gas hobs are Stone Age, a thing of the past. We're not going to, what we want to be able to convince people is that they can have safe black box heating boilers at home and they don't need to worry about safety issues.
Tom, a last reflection maybe before we close this subject off.
I don't know the particulars about gas hobs in being fitted in new homes or on the hydrogen house there. Stella might have more information on that.
They are having hydrogen hobs fitted, hydrogen cookers, hydrogen fires, which look and feel the same as gas hobs, gas fires, gas ovens.
And again, I think that complements testing that Hive for Heat's done on some of those appliances.
Okay, I want to be respectful of people's time and on the agenda. So let's not go into this topic further now, but I do think it's, Jonathan, thanks for bringing up the point. This is maybe relevant input for the workstream 5. With that, let's go back to Tom. Tom, before you close it off, I think there were a couple of words you wanted to say about the ENA development of the National Energy Systems Map and how that relates to the presentation Bethan just gave.
Yes, I think just to sort of say that the data we're looking to collect through that the 6.1 deliverable could in future link into a wider piece of work that ENA's working on across gas and electricity networks. And really this is sort of building on recommendations that networks received in the Energy Data Task Force report. So what ENA is looking at doing currently is sort of a proof of concept development of a data map linked to coordinate data to sort of bring together network assets, generators, intensive users and their energy demands and map that out on a UK map. The idea is that this information should help improve the investment opportunities right across industry, give clarity to those, but also support sort of new markets and encourage markets to develop similar to what we have seen on flexibility. So I think just wanted to sort of flag that although we're leading this work through Gas Goes Green, in future years it's got the potential to join up with some of the other work that ENA's got in hand.
Okay. Then with that, I think we are almost at the end. This, of course, shows some of the logistic information. On my behalf, thank you for this very engaging session. I think you have provided a lot of useful input. I think this was very interactive. So thank you all for discussing so actively and providing your inputs. With that, I give the final word to Tom to say a few last words and close it off then.
Yeah, just really to reiterate that, thanks everyone for your views, for your input to help shape the work. It's been great to get so much feedback and engagement today. Thanks to Bill, Courtney, Ed and Bethan for your presentations and responses to comments. Materials from the meeting will be circulated, as we've mentioned, will be up on the ENA website. If anyone has any questions, do drop us a line. Our next meeting is on the 1st of September. Dates should be in your diaries for that, but several opportunities to get involved in work we've got underway between now and then, not least on blending, as Bill mentioned. And a final thanks to Katie, Mikhail, Leonard for organising and facilitating. Wish you all a great afternoon and see you again soon.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
It's fine.